Hello, beautiful day today. I'm out here talking about the Consolamentum. We've had this conversation a few times before. But what I wanted to do was read to you pretty much the introduction with part one. So part one is an analysis of this cover. It looks like a simple cover, but you'll see that it is not a simple cover at all. This is the entire koan path lined up in one image. But if you don't know what you're looking at, you won't see it. So, the diagram holds the complete koan path, even though it doesn't seem like it. The boson, as it is known in Templarism, is the beginning. If you cross the threshold of the axis, you will realize that there are only differentiations because of the central axis, in which the koan is called the central axis fire. The central axis fire is where you enter into the W of the central koan circle. In Kabbalah, it was referred to as the mysterious realm in the Psalms, and later called the green line. I believe it was called this because it was similar to the natural line or the way of nature. Paracelsus probably incorporated this language in his Arceus, which was the gut's biological reset, or what he called the gut alchemist. So essentially what happens is there's a natural way of everything that follows the natural order and the natural consequences of the natural order, that everything kind of evolves in an evolutionary arc. And what happens is, like, matter and electrons and atoms and all the subatomic particles and all of that, they have this kind of, not creative design, but definitely a predetermined path by which they're allowed to move or go. It is not without human interaction that they are allowed to go on that path. That nature just does what nature does. If human beings were here, we would not have any effect on nature were we not to act upon it. So this is the natura naturata and the natura naturans, which Spinoza talked pretty extensively about. However, what happens is human beings inevitably not contaminate, but have an affect on their environment. So when they do this, it causes the natural order to have more of a human order or a human interference pattern with what the natural order was already doing. And that's what this is talking about. It's saying that the Psalms had indicated that the green line or the natural order was something that everybody knew about. And as the human kingdoms were trying to take over, there was more and more of a unnatural order happening. And when this happened, the kings and all of the people in the land during the time of, the Old Testament were basically, they were in sorrow and they were in sadness because their world stopped being a naturally ordered world. And this is one of the benefits of the Psalms. I didn't talk about this in the book, obviously. This is on the next book that I'm going to be putting out. So definitely go ahead and grab that when you get a chance. But on the Psalms and the natural order, the Psalms are written in a way where they reorient the self's ontological and epistemological, basically, origins. When the self is aligned toward these ontological and epistemological origins, and studies of phenomenology, the existence of the human arc is a lot less sorrowful or filled with this embodied suffering called, dukkha in the Pali, but hell in the Christian theology basically is what it is, or the torment and emotional distortion of mental illness, on and on and on. Now, there are some physiological and physical things that happen that cause a human being to be, kind of set apart from others. So the human design, due to interference with dietary and augmentation of unnatural arc of living, causes the organs, I believe. And so I learned from a seminar from the Vesica Institute that it causes the organs to overwork. So over-processed emotional responses make the organs have to kind of take the residual that's over the natural order, and therefore if the self is having ideas of what oneself should be or is, or is being taken advantage of, on and on and on, all of the self meaning that we attribute to events, then the organs take the blunt of that emotional distortion and perceptual, delusion and dishonesty. So it's a very subtle place to be stuck in. But if you're stuck there, you kind of can't get yourself out of it, because the self brings up solutions that are not natural solutions. They are self-congratulatory. They're self-congratulatory or ontologically distorted ideas. That's why the Psalms and the reordering of the human constitution of the mind and soul will lead you to not self-congratulatory ends, but divine praise, and the eternal will be recognized as your ontological ground as you move toward this basis of reorienting yourself. Now, when it comes to the epistemology, what we're looking at are basically things exist in an evolutionary arc from all of the kingdoms. Matter doesn't just exist because the human being has an unnatural affect on matter. Matter exists because of an evolutionary design that's within matter itself. Now, I don't know if this is a code within matter. That's not something that any of us will ever really be able to affect, is what is the natural, unhuman, altered course of matter without human beings doing it. So we're not really getting into that, but the point is that the old philosophers, the pre-Socratic philosophers, and even some of the Socratic philosophers had come to the point where they thought that matter was part of this evolutionary arc in what they call the kingdoms. And this was why Pythagoras's theorem was so important, because it said that the hypotenuse is equal to the sides of a right-sided angle. And this is like, what are you talking about? And this was one of the Masonic secrets too, that basically the natural order, God, mankind, and nature were all on one axis. But the more you depart from that ontological axis to the other side and becoming a species that is unique unto its own, like the humankind, you have gone from mineral, animal, vegetable, then to the human. So what they're saying is that the hypotenuse, the connection between these two seemingly unrelated grounds, will actually be the same as the distance between whatever you're putting as the kingdom and as its source. So it's kind of a weird way of saying the entire philosophy, and using mathematics to prove the incommensurables is what they called it. It was to prove that there was a design order to all things, that mathematically there were laws that were so precise that they could not be evaded. And that was the uniqueness and beauty of Pythagoras' theorem, which was that any right angle will always have the proportion that is there. Now, I'm of course oversimplifying it. I mean, I'm not talking about Euclid's geometry and all of that on purpose, but this is what the Mason was to know, is that by a devotion to a supreme being, that one would be ontologically reoriented toward this as the foundation being of life, and that we as humans were just evolutions from that original plan, from the mineral to the vegetable to the animal and to the human. This evolutionary arc is talked about in the Psalms. They say you were there, there's no greater than you, and I come from you, and there's always putting the source of one's selfhood or phenomenological origin into divinity. And this was a really profound thing for the medieval and other ages, until selfishness became prevalent in culture. After the 1600s and the serfs kind of lost their claim on their ordering, their social order, there came to be a rampant capitalistic view that individuals were not part of a predetermined course anymore, but that they were the authors of their own course. When this happened, selfhood became exalted in a way that it didn't need to show homage or recapitulate to any other ontological source other than the fabricated selfhood. And when that happened, we went into an unnatural way of reality testing. Reality was tested by the self and the meaning that reality had to the self, rather than the self tested by reality and the meaning that the self had to the bigger order of things. So this is the main distinction within the Natura Naturans and the Natura Naturata. And that's what essentially happens, is when you fall through the fabricated center, you also fall into the fabricated reality, or the matrix as it's called. I don't believe that there's some matrix out there that is programming everything, but there is a predetermined non-human influenced environment that when we orient our selfhood to it, the environment will correct the self. The problem is that usually the self is orienting itself toward the environment, and therefore interpreting what the environment means to the self rather than the other way around. So the Psalms are a major indicator of this realignment of one's primary faculties of ontological grounding and epistemological discernment, or dissonance. When you say, no, this is this and this is not that, that creates a hierarchy of meaning. And so if this is this and that is not this and that is that rather than this, you're differentiating in a dualistic fashion an epistemological understanding. Now, everybody has it, and we easily separate items in that epistemological ground, so to speak, but to reality, that is not reality. That is our mental impression upon the epistemological kind of fluid area of what things mean. And therefore, it exalts the self as the meaning maker rather than the natural order and divinity for making meaning itself. It's a very subtle distinction, but the Psalms are completely grounded in this era, and they do not deviate ever. They never say, I'm so great because I came up with all of these triviums and quadriviums of knowledge, and therefore I'm the one that should be praised because of my intellect and ability to intellectually distinguish between categories and other factors. So this is the primary confusion that the book is going to help solve. But it does it in a way that it doesn't really attack ontology and epistemology the way that the Psalms do. So I'm probably going to write another book on that. But this book will open you up into that era. So I didn't think I was going to deviate into the Naturanans and Naturans and the Natura Naturata, but, you know, winning an IHOP, you know, gazebo, one has to just seize the opportunity as it presents itself. Thanks a lot.